Yo, what's going on, everyone? Hope you all had a fantastic weekend. Let's get down to business and talk about Bitcoin's price action on this lovely Monday. In this video, we're going to be discussing my Elliott Wave counts for the bullish and bearish ideas and see how we can narrow down the probabilities with my updated personal conviction. Hopefully, I can help everyone create their own thesis for this current range. Now, our first count here is going to be the continuation of the bullish narrative, which is still my preferred scenario for the time being, but I am aware of the bearish scenarios, which I will also be discussing in this video as well. Now, for this idea specifically, we have the overall higher degree wave 4 being complete, and this is something we have also been discussing for quite a while. I would say that this is still a pretty good possibility for a wave 4 termination, as we did hit one of the first major Fibonacci levels of the 38.2% when taken from the pivot of our macro wave 2 to our assumed wave 3 termination at the top here. This in return helps us project some support levels via the normal Fibonacci retracements. For those that are new, markets are going to typically react as each deeper Fibonacci levels start to get hit. For now, the 38.2% is one of the first levels that we did hit. Then the 50% is going to be our next kind of assumption, which is still not actually a golden Fibonacci level, but more importantly, the 61.8% is going to typically be the strongest reaction of all, which we also didn't hit. But it is quite typical for a reversal on a macro wave 4 to reverse at the 38.2%. Now, for this idea, I have labeled this overall corrective pattern for the higher degree wave 4 as a double zigzag scenario where waves W and wave Y is fitted as 535 ABCs, meaning that I am seeing this current structure as a 535 and a 535 respectively. Now, I have been getting a few DMs over the past few days on if it is possible to have this overall idea terminate as some kind of flat idea or even a combo idea for the WXY. Now, I, for one, don't accept flats personally until they reach at least 95 to 100%, not even the 90% of the first wave structure, meaning that the 95% has to be at least of this origin of wave A or a wave W, meaning that I also try to stay away from accepting any flats that even hit the 90%, which we also haven't done in this case. I'd still personally not consider it a flat. It's pretty tricky when it does hit just exactly at the 90%. So this is more of a personal approach, as that still more or less creates a lower high within the price action. That is why expanded flats are actually more common to see in the markets than normal flats. I've been quite vocal about this, as many students were also trying to fit in, double corrective combo structures when we were trading earlier within the range. Even I was trying to fit one in from an educational perspective, but I was pretty sure that wasn't the case, as it is extremely rare to even see one. And I think I can say I was also one of the first to even remove that idea from my list of probabilities. It's quite rare to have a B or wave X, as we have here, to hit only 80% of the origin of the beginning wave structure for waves A or W, where some may even accept this structure to be called a flat if it hits only the 80%. But I'm more neutral on that. I think it's just better to call this as a normal zigzag or a double zigzag structure because of how the macro shows its structure overall being complete with a look of a lower high being created, right? So from an educational perspective or standpoint, I can understand the subjectivity behind that, but I would pretty much advise those who may think the flat idea, because we should remove that idea because we have a flat within a flat as well, right? If we're seeing this as a flat. It's also pretty rare to have a flat within a flat because we do have an expanded flat now within that B wave, right? Or wave X. And most especially if we're seeing this as a B wave, you should be really careful if you're seeing this as an expanded flat. Now, it is valid to have a flat within a B wave of a flat, but just note that having an expanded flat for that case is not only even more rare, it's not even possible with the current literature to have an expanded flat if in the case we were working in a possible larger expanded flat. So that is something to keep in mind. I've been going back and forth with Elliott Wave International, and they are still reviewing that. I've done more or less my best to try and convince them based on expanded flats, because wave X's could be accepted where you have an expanded flat. So that is kind of a strange thing. So I tried to convince them with how Fibonacci works, the basis of how the golden ratio works, and I think I've done a pretty good job more or less, and they're still reviewing that idea. So it is something to consider. That's why I'm more neutral to this approach, where I do accept flats sometimes within flats. So that's kind of a different topic in itself. But anyways, going back to the actual topic, this overall idea is now complete as a possible wave 4 termination of a double zigzag or a multiple zigzag. And then we also have the idea of a possible ABC being complete here as well. Same idea, similar idea for that matter, where we have a leading diagonal going to wave A, and then same flat structure for wave B, and then an impulse wave for this wave C rather than having that wave Y as the possibility of an ABC. Now, I am choosing the WXY scenario overall because this gives us a little bit of more room that we maybe also still be working within that possible wave Y to work for one more move to the downside. Now, we'll go over that in just a moment. So if we actually take the time to zoom in and talk about how this can be fitted in, now we have to talk about if the bullish scenario is going to be continuing, how are we going to fit that in if this wave 4 is completed? The only real way that I'm going to be able to fit that in is having this possibly complete as some kind of 1-2-1-2 structure. Now, we're going to get a little backlash on this probably, but this is the only way I can currently see it, where we have this as a possible parent degree, wave 1-2 of the intermediate degree, this being a completed 5-wave move up into this degree of a wave 1 of a smaller degree. Now, this wave 1-2 is larger than this wave 1-2 of the parent degree, but it is not invalid, okay? Some people are trying to, overcompensate themselves and over exaggerate how these rules and guidelines are working, but it is valid. That is the most important thing. If it's valid, it's something that we should be working on because it is pretty much the only way that we can be creating a structure. Now, the reason why is because fundamentally, if we have a 28% bounce off of the lows, this may be the only way we can currently count it for the time being. I mean, of course, we're not going to want to extend this further in time for a 1-2, but having this as a 1-2-1-2 idea fits just as fine as a possible ABC as well. But a 1-2-1-2 structure is possibly the only way we're going to have a good look going to the upside if this is a terminated wave 4. Meaning that we are now looking for an extension of this intermediate degree wave 3. And of course, there is a lot of hurdles and obstacles to break through, but it does have an idealized structure, right? And that's the key point here. I always say idealized zigzags, idealized impulse structures, right? So if that's the case, this move here is a diagonal going into a wave 1, 2, and then a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 into that extension of a wave 3 intermediate degree that would eventually break this all-time high. Resistance now turned into support temporarily. Then we have that wave 4 of the intermediate degree, and then we'll complete that intermediate degree wave 5 to complete our first larger wave 1 to be completed in yellow. Then we can finally say that the CME gap was a very important level to break, and breaking all of this above can now act as support, meaning that if we do come back down for a larger wave 1-2, then we can finally say that the CME gap is going to be acting as support, and that final will be the first beginning leg of wave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, finally going into that territory where we're looking for this wave 5 to complete of the higher degree. So that is why I'm seeing this as a completion, where we can also have this idea where the ABC has completed, and we can also have this same idea worked upon as well. So there's two ideas now of completion of a multiple zigzag and also a normal zigzag, where the same idea of a continuation to the upside is going to happen. Now we can do some kind of ranging structure here, but for now, with the current data given, it looks like the best way to get out of here from a bullish standpoint is a possible nested 1-2-1-2 structure to the upside. That's the only way I'm seeing it. Now that is a little bit lower in probability for the time being with the current data given and the sentiment because of this pullback, but with each pullback, a lot of people start to lose their conviction and start to focus too much on the bearish idea, and that's where they lose a lot of their grip on their original narrative. Remember, our original narrative was that we are still working within a possible completion of a wave 4. So it's best to stay into that narrative and try to fit in that conviction along with that original narrative, because these are the levels that we were looking for in terms of a pullback. Now, with that being said, we do have a possible lower possibility of creating a lower low for a wave Y, right? That's why I said instead of that ABC being completed entirely, which would be invalidated if it broke that previous low, we do have the possibility of still working in a possible WXY to the downside, meaning that we are looking for one more leg to the downside for a wave Y, right? So what that means is we're still working within an ABC structure. Instead of this being the completed ABC to the downside, we do have merit as a possible impulsive structure going into a wave A of the intermediate degree. And instead of seeing this as an ABC, we're seeing this as a 5-way move where we originally saw that for the wave C as well. We're now seeing this as the beginning of a wave A. This move up is a 3-wave move. Now, this has a lot of merit from a bearish perspective, and that's why I'm saying that we do have a possibility of also going down and going into that 161.8 level if we're taking to the extension of this wave W, N, X, and Y as well, as we didn't even hit the more common target, not only for equality of a wave 101, we hit that zone, but again, we kind of hit that no man's zone where we went only in between the 100% and the 161.8%. If we hit the 161.8% and we get a strong reaction off of those lows, then we may have a little bit more conviction that this actually may be the overall WXY structure. So how would that be completed? We would work with, again, an A, B, and C. Instead of seeing this as a possible 1-2-1-2, we're now seeing this as a B, C, as that is a hybrid structure of a 5-3-5. That is now turning into a possible impulsive structure. So we're looking for our first actionary wave to the downside for a possible wave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, down to complete for a wave C. Depending on the severity of the impulse to the downside, I believe that should be the overall controlled pullback for this larger ABC going into a wave Y, if that happens. So I believe that is how I'm currently seeing the WXY or the ABC scenario either terminating either now or terminating a little bit lower. I am still working with the conviction just with the current data and my personal bias that we may be completed for this wave 4, and I'm still seeing this as a possible 1-2-1-2. That is my personal conviction. I am more than happy to be wrong and also more than happy to accept a little bit of a lower level to have that wave Y extend a little bit more in time and also for a wave 4 of the higher degree. So that is my way of personally seeing how the Bitcoin price action is playing out, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this can overall be turning into a larger bearish structure. So if we are looking at this being the overall completion of a bull market entirely, we could be working in some kind of expanding diagonal, meaning that we may be working in a leading expanding diagonal going into wave 1, and then this may be the 2, and we may be working for a 3, 4, 5 into that first actionary wave, 1, 2 pullback, 3, 4, 5. That'll bring us down way lower than we are originally anticipating. Now, this also could be the beginning of a 1, 2, where we're replacing that wave A and B as a wave 1, 2, and we would originally have this as the flat for that wave 2 inside, and then we can be working for that move to the downside just as similarly and respectively. So for the time being, I don't want to talk about those ideas, but that idea is also starting to kind of surface up on my radar. However, for the time being, I am still monitoring the idea that the wave 4 has completed entirely. So hopefully that was helpful, ladies and gentlemen. I am currently seeing this as a terminated wave 4 for the time being. That's the first scenario. The second idea is that we may be working for a possible ABC to the downside. That's my second probability. And then we have, again, this idea is just fitted just differently, but it's the same idea where we have this as an ABC that's completed just like that WXY. Trying to remove a little bit of that subjectivity if you're not seeing it as a WXY, but it fits the same because we can fit in a possible leading diagonal in there as well. So that's that. And then on the shorter time frames, again, that 1-2-1-2 idea is possibly the only way I'm going to be possibly counting it right now with the current data given. But we did hit a very interesting level. This either as a WXY or ABC, this as a diagonal going to wave 1, and then we had a flat here. Really nice looking flat structure actually for that 1-2. It would have been even more nice if we actually completed that wave 2 here and then we continued, but it is still valid even with this wave 2 of a lower degree going into that previous territory of the higher degree. But it is starting to look larger in time, so ideally we would want to break this high here. If we break this level here, that would give us a far more confident approach to this idea that we may be working for an impulsive structure move to the upside of the lower degree, even of wave 3 to the upside, and that would be ultimately creating that Wave 3. That is how I'm currently seeing it, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys in the next video. Oh yeah, and make sure to please subscribe to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Subscribe. Those help me create a lot of videos. If you like the video as well, please hit the like button. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.